The US presidential candidates stage a final push to energize young voters before Election Day. There are signs the youth vote could play a historic role in deciding who becomes the next president. So what issues are young Americans worried about? And how much political influence do they really have? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Well, the experts are predicting that young Americans could turn out in record numbers to vote on November the 4th. This follows a surge in youth turnout during the primaries and rising young voter registration. So, are young Americans becoming a political force, and just how strong is their voice? Michelle Henry went to find out.
Anticipating a record turnout, many states across America have begun early voting.
Vote. Just go ahead and vote.
I actually feel great. This is my first time voting.
I feel great. I feel empowered. There's a lot of people that fought for this right to vote, and I'm glad that I was able to take advantage of it.
For many first-time voters, it was too much to have to wait until November 4th to cast their ballots.
In recent decades, the youth vote has been seen as apathetic, consistently voting well below the national average. Realizing the potential of this untapped resource, both McCain and Obama have campaigned vigorously for their support, registering young voters in record numbers.
On university campuses across the U.S., there's a newfound enthusiasm for politics. No more so than in Washington, D.C., the seat of government.
Most people prior to this election would have thought that politics was something for more of the older generation. But this election has brought out the youth vote and the youth activism in, colleges around the country.
I always was cynical because I was just like, what can I do? There's nothing that I can do. But being a part of this campaign, and one thing I've realized that it only takes one person to care. And if one person cares, you can make a huge impact.
The McCain and Obama campaigns are reaching out to young people, but at the same time, young Americans are themselves reaching out, engaged by the dramatic shifts in the fortunes of U.S. foreign and domestic policy.
I feel like students are realizing that this is going to affect me. I'm going to be affected when I graduate. What jobs are going to be out there?
There has been a complete change in the participation and the sentiments that American youth have had about the political process. MySpace, Facebook, all of the social networks that the youth are using online have been used by the campaigns to get that information out to students and to engage them in the political process.
Welcome to the third and last presidential.
Along with new media, the more traditional one-on-one debates have also drawn big crowds, no more so than at Georgetown University, Bill Clinton's alma mater.
It's a confluence of circumstances. I mean, not only are we sick to death with the Bush administration, and we've had this, economic collapse, we've got a war in Iraq, it's like the perfect storm.
And just sort of the symbolism of change, you have this really old guy versus this young, energetic, exciting guy who's really inspirational, that really, is the first candidate that I can remember who reached out to youth students, really made it an important part of his campaign.
I want Joe the plumber to spread that wealth around.
The much-quoted saying that not to be a liberal at 20 shows a lack of heart, but to be one at 30 shows a lack of brains, is something that, if polls are to be believed, is being borne out on this election, where recent figures suggest that Democrats have cornered the youth vote.
McCain has a way to help middle class.
But young Republicans echo a criticism raised by others in their party that those voting Democrat are voting on style, not substance.
During our political discussions in class, they often bring up Barack Obama's charisma, his age, and stuff that is important. But when I bring up policies, most people are blank on them. I think that we need to get more focused on policies that are affecting us. Because when he comes to office, it's not going to be his charisma that's going to affect me. It's going to be the policy that he acts.
It is perhaps inevitable that students in the nation's capital would be engaged by this campaign. Universities are easy targets with their political clubs and ambitious future politicians. What is more impressive about these campaigns is how both candidates have attempted to engage youth beyond the gates of their traditional hunting grounds.
John McCain and Obama did reach out to a lot of young people, especially a lot of people that I know that never thought about voting, but up until this year, they actually are willing to vote.
Mainly it's like about the prices on stuff, and I'm saying, like, and how everything going right now, and the change that Obama said he was going to make. People, most people running with that right there, though.
Politics usually begins at home. Children of political parents tend to be political, but in this election, it seems, young people are helping to re-engage the older generation.
I recently had a conversation with my grandmother. She's like, yeah, I'm not going to vote this election. I was like, why? She's like, I've seen it all before. Everyone has big promises, but no one does anything. I was just like, look at our economy. Look at going to the gas prices. I was just like, come on, you have to vote this time.
The excitement this election has generated is not in doubt, but the question remains, has America's youth vote come of age? And will this enthusiasm be translated into action come November 4th?
Well, joining us now are our guests in Washington, D.C., Rob Anderson, editor of Campus Progress Action. In Boston, Peter Levine, director of Circle, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. Also in Boston, Malcolm Glenn, a senior at Harvard University and president of the school newspaper. Welcome all to the program. Malcolm Glenn, there at Harvard. Let me start with you, if I may. Analysts are predicting that young voters could turn out in record numbers for this election. What's behind this? What's driving this, do you think?
Well, certainly the experience I have is based a lot on the anecdotal, things I've come across here at Harvard, where we're afforded a number of resources. But, the passion this year is just unlike any passion I've ever seen in any other election cycle. I think a lot of it has to do with the candidates. These guys are people with compelling stories, stories that connect with young people, optimistic visions for the future. And I think that especially in the case of a candidate like Barack Obama, who's winning the youth vote by a 2-to-1 margin, he really just connects with young people on a level that a candidate hasn't really done in the past. And I think that's why you're going to see such an increase in turnout like you've never seen before next week.
Rob Anderson in Washington, D.C. We've seen a surge also in youth turnout in the primaries and the caucuses and rising voter registration. Why has the youth vote increased so much? Is it just the passion that Malcolm Glenn described there?
I don't think so. It's not just about the candidates, I don't believe. Young people really care about the issues. Right now in the United States, the economy isn't doing very well, and that means for young people, it's very difficult to get a job. We're having a difficult time paying for college, and it's hard to get health care. Young people are looking at the issues, they're evaluating the candidates based on those issues, and I think they're choosing a candidate whom they believe will help them out in the economy, in the pocketbook, but also, of course, who shares their vision on foreign policy and other issues as well.
Peter Levine in Boston, I mean, it is quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, something like 44 million people between the ages of 18 to 29 are eligible to vote. I mean, why has the young vote been energized like this, do you think?
Well, I do think it's everything my two colleagues said was true, and certainly the Barack Obama phenomenon is a part of it. He does lead by about 2-to-1, and that indicates a lot of enthusiasm. One thing I would throw in, though, is that in 2004, young people actually voted at a higher rate than they had in the past. It was quite a substantial increase. So, and that, of course, was before Barack Obama was a national candidate. So I think part of the story is about this generation, which is more engaged and idealistic and involved than the preceding generations were.
Malcolm Glenn, what's happening on college campuses like yours, like Harvard? I mean, are campuses some of the main battlegrounds to win over young Americans?
Well, it's interesting. In a place like Massachusetts, we often find ourselves looking for ways to become active in the process. Massachusetts isn't really a swing state, and so there are a lot of efforts as far as getting absentee ballots sent in, get out the vote efforts. There was lots of registration at the beginning of the year. And we realized that, we are a community that comes from all around the country. And so what we're really trying to do is mobilize the people that come from, especially those swing states, to make sure that they get their friends to vote, to make sure that they send in their ballots. It's really interesting, people who aren't receiving their ballots yet, they're really worried. And I think it's a really good problem to have, that people are worried that they're potentially not going to be able to get the vote. I think they will, but I think the fact that we're so interested in making sure that we get that chance, I think speaks really, really well for the future.
Rob Anderson in Washington, D.C., I mean, in states where the outcome could be close on election day, I mean, how much difference could the youth vote make? Obviously, they have to turn out and vote.
Well, of course. Yeah, first of all, we want to make sure that everyone's right to vote is protected, and that's what a lot of groups are focusing on now. But in terms of having an impact on the election, young voters can really make the difference. In 2004, Wisconsin was a swing state. John Kerry won that state by a very, very small margin, and youth participation made up of 20% of that vote. So almost a quarter of the electorate was young people, and arguably they knocked it over into John Kerry's column.
Peter Levine, I mean, how much are young Americans, do you think, in tune with the current economic crisis? I mean, are they concerned about politics? What are the issues they worry about?
Well, they tend to worry about the same issues that their parents and other older Americans do, and certainly the economy is number one right now. I think it has certain kind of youth, there's aspects of the issue that affect youth more. For example, the cost of college, the difficulty of getting first jobs out of high school or out of college affect them more. But certainly the economy is the number one issue. One thing that Barack Obama has used effectively is the idea of offering more opportunities for young Americans to be involved in national and community service programs and to pay for their college costs if they do national and community service. I think that's quite popular and works well for him because it fits well with his resume, because he was a community organizer and lots of young people were themselves involved in community service, so they kind of understand what that means.
Malcolm Glenn in Harvard, let's go back to 2004, to the last election, because John Kerry believed that young voters would have helped propel him to the White House. In fact, they didn't quite turn out in the numbers that he'd hoped for. What do you think is going to happen on Election Day?
Well, I think the passion this year, coupled with the issues, as my colleagues have said, is really going to make a bigger difference than was the case in 2004. You know, people always talk about the economy this year, the economy as the driving force behind why people make their voting decisions. Well, we have a floundering economy, and we also have a foreign conflict. And usually you don't get that confluence of two really, really huge issues. I'm someone who's entering into the job market, and I'm worried about the economy, but I'm also someone who cares about foreign policy. And so, these two issues are really going to drive a lot of people's voting decisions. And I think the fact that we have both of those things so salient on the minds of young people is really going to make young people go to the polls in far greater numbers than they did in 2004.
Peter Levine in Boston, let me ask you a final question before we go to a break. I mean, which of the candidates do you think has a better appeal to young voters? I mean, many analysts say Obama's tapped into this sentiment for change and hope for this current generation.
Well, we know from the recent surveys that he is tapping in. He's got about a 2-to-1 at least margin among young people, so they obviously prefer him. And I think part of it is his inspirational message and his rhetoric of hope and his general style. But an important part of it is his inclusiveness. It's possible to engage directly with his campaign in many ways. So he's got literally hundreds of thousands of volunteers, which is a remarkable thing, and a very good way to get young people involved. He's also promising to offer ways for young people to be involved after he gets elected in actually addressing America's problems, and I think that's very inspirational to this generation.
Okay, Peter Levine, we'll say goodbye to you for now. It's time for a short break, but when we come back, we look at why there's been such a surge in youth turnout and which candidate appeals most to young Americans. Stay with us, won't you?